Hey there guys, I've defrosted my Blackberries, or Brambles, and apart from there being some lovely juice in there, the darkness has returned to most of the berries. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to place them in a large pot. I've got a plastic, all sterilised mind you, I've got a plastic potato masher, and I'm literally just going to gently mash up these berries. You don't want to do too much damage. What you basically want to do is pop every individual berry, but you don't want to actually crack the seeds, because the seeds are incredibly bitter. If you've ever known if you've bitten into a blackberry, it tastes very sweet and juicy, but then as soon as you bite through the seeds, you get a sudden wash of bitterness. So what we really want to avoid is cracking those seeds, which shouldn't be a problem. Instead of using a plastic home brewing container, I'm just using a large cooking pot because frankly it's easier to mash in. If you're using one of these 5-gallon drums, they tend to be about this high and it's more effort than it's worth. Got our blackberries, got our sterilised spoon. This can get messy, so be very careful. Blackberry juice will stain. Now, there's some juice in there. Retain that. The old potato masher, as I said earlier, I made a point of using a non-rinse sterilising solution. So you don't actually, obviously, don't need to rinse it off. You don't need to worry about any of it getting into there, because that can be a real pain. The trusty old potato masher. Obviously I sterilised this in a non-rinse solution, so it doesn't actually matter if anything drips into here. But I sterilised the whole object, and I've washed my hands thoroughly. The point about using a non-rinse one is obviously it means it's much less faff, because otherwise you have to make sure you're rinsing with water that's either been boiled or was already sterile to begin with. And it's far easier. In fact, some of the sterilising solutions, for example Star San, actually have certain byproducts in them that are beneficial for the yeast. So, as I said, I'm just going to start mashing this away. Ooh. This is the fun part. Of course, you don't need to use a potato masher. You could literally get your hands in there and start taking these berries apart with a bit of a squish and a squeeze. Again, be very careful, especially if you're like me and you have a fondness for wearing clothes that are of a lighter colour, because you're going to end up getting them stained unless you're a very careful person. Pretty much mash these as much as we need to. Obviously you're not going to splat every single berry, but you want to try and make sure that you're more or less dealing with a thick sludge like this, rather than actual blackberries. Obviously you can keep going at this for as long as you like, but at this stage we've reached the point where I should probably put the water in. I've measured 2 litres of water and boiled it in a pot. You could obviously do this in a kettle if you have one that measures out the right amount. Unfortunately my kettle only goes up to 1.7 litres. So I'm just going to measure a little boiling water into this jug to try and get the last of, into this bowl to try and get the last of the juice out. And there we go, that'll do. It's not essential to get every single drop, as long as we've got the majority of it. At this point you have to be very careful. I have in here my blackberry or bramble puree. I have in here my water, into which the water is literally boiled about 30 seconds ago. Now, it's important that you don't try and boil the blackberries. All you're doing is pouring in the boiling water and giving it a good hefty stir. Once it's all mixed in, take your lid, which should be sterilised, put it on top, and leave that to cool down. Temperature check it if you want, or just leave it till it's a lot cooler. I'm actually popping at the house, so
it doesn't matter, I'll just leave it for a while. Once it's below 21 degrees, then you can add your teaspoon of pectolase. Well, some time has passed and this has cooled down again to a sensible temperature. Everything seems to have settled slightly inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a teaspoon of the pectolase. Apparently helps with the yield of juice by helping break down. It's just less than a teaspoon, this last little bit. Pop over the lid. And that's us for the next 8 hours. In fact, it doesn't need to be quite 8 hours, at least 8 hours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this until tomorrow morning, at which point I'm going to continue on. So we'll see you in the morning. Hey there folks, it's day number 2, and I'm going to be adding a Camden tablet to the mix, because I'm not actually going to be pitching the yeast for another several days, and it's a good idea to get rid of any wild yeasts that may have either been on the fruits themselves or floating around in the air. Now, you don't have to do this, but I think it's a good idea because this is going to sit for a little while. It's probably best to make sure that we minimise the risk of accidental infection in this. So first thing I'm going to do is crush it up using a good old-fashioned mortar and pestle. Die! Die, Camden tablet, die! Good mortar and pestle. Worth having. This one was a Christmas present. Okay, seriously now. Crushed up the Camden tablet pretty well. What's left now is to put it in and mix it in with a sterilised spoon. It's delicious. Let's pop that in here. As soon as you're ready, stir vigorously. Not too vigorously, because you don't want to actually get much air in there. But you really want to make sure that that Camden tablet mixes in. Now, the recipe I'm actually using to make this blackberry wine is quite different from a lot of the ones you'll find online. Basically because blackberry wine is one of these strange and odd ones where there doesn't seem to be any specific correct way of doing it. If you Google blackberry wine, you'll find a dozen different recipes, all of which have often conflicting or contradictory steps in them. Ironically, I actually started off using this. The information in here is largely the same as you'll find anywhere else because, let's face it, brewing hasn't really changed much in the last 100 years other than people being able to buy individually the ingredients and the different chemicals separately. Other than that, it's whatever recipe you use is up to you, and there's a fair bit of mixing and matching involved. In mine, I've taken parts of some recipes and ideas of others. It's generally a good idea to keep your fruit, sugar and liquid levels to one recipe specifically, because otherwise you're going to end up with completely disparate levels. But this is also why I'm making a big effort this time to make sure that I actually use my hydrometer, measure it beforehand and calculate at the end what I get, because it'll be interesting to see what my own particular take on the recipes ends up with. It could be that this is not one of the best ones. It could be that I'm probably better off following another recipe exactly. But nothing ventured, nothing gained, and to be honest, I'm far too much of a cook to actually go with any one specific recipe without fiddling with it a little. On a bizarre side note, somebody actually said to me the other day that they wondered whether or not I was the Walter White of home brewing. No. Absolutely not. For a start, I have a lot of hair. And secondly, I don't drive a weird car. And I don't cook meth, Jesse.